Let's talk about why Black families don't divulge medical and mental health history. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I have been working with victims and perpetrators of abuse as well as in the mental health sector for many years now. And I want to have a deeper conversation on why Black families do not divulge medical and mental health history. So I think number one, I will start off by talking about how there's a lot of Black families, even today in the Black community, that people just do not believe and or trust doctors. And I get where that comes from. There's a long history of trauma. There's a long history of abusive experimentation or neglect in medical health care, such as like the Henrietta Lacks case, and many others. Oh gosh, I can't think of the airmen that they allowed to have syphilis. But anyhow, those would be examples of cases where there's just like, I don't trust what a doctor's telling me, and so there's this fear plus this like, I don't trust what people are telling me about myself, and I'm not going to pass that off to my children because I don't want them to trust the healthcare system. And while there's still medical abuse and medical neglect, as well as cultural insensitivity and incompetency going on, you still owe your children, your due diligence to see what's going on. And so, unfortunately, sometimes the guardedness, the cultural paranoia can override a person's sense of responsibility or ability to be able to trust the healthcare system. Like, I just don't want to pass that on to my children. I think number two, what I've seen in Black families is that there is, there doesn't seem to want to be an acknowledgement of passing on something hereditary. No, I'm gonna pass it off to and I've seen and heard some wild stories about hereditary illnesses where people may attribute it to like animals, like, oh, she pet that animal, or she drank from a particular faucet, or she ate a certain type of food. That's where that came from. So there's this blatant sort of denial that there's just this blatant sort of denial that they could be passing on something to their children. Number three, there is ignorance. So there's a lot of people that, go to the doctor and don't understand what the doctor is telling them. It happens all the time. When doctors sort of use this medical language, they use this jargon, which is one of the reasons why I try to keep what I say very simple when I talk on social media. I try not to use a whole lot of psychological jargon or a whole lot of abuse jargon that people use. I try to keep it very simple because I know in working in healthcare and mental health care over the years, there's a lot of people that will show up. There's a lot of people that can't read and write. There's a lot of people that have learning disabilities, but there's just a lot of people that just in general, even if they can read and write and they have a regular education level, there's a lot of people that still just don't understand what you're explaining to them, unless you keep it very simple. That's why a lot of times when I'm working with people, when I'm doing evaluations or counseling even, I'll have people, when I'm explaining something, I'll say, does it make sense? And then I'll have them repeat it back to me using their own language, just so that I know that they're comprehending what I'm saying, in particular when it's serious. So there's people that go to the doctor and they'll sit quietly by it and they'll agree, they'll take the literature, they'll sort of pretend as though they understand what the doctor is saying, but in all actuality they don't. And so when people don't understand, they kind of throw the information to the side. They're just like, whatever, I'm not going to really think about it, this and that. So there's that, and then there is, I think I'm on number 4. So there's that. So always be sure, before I move on to number 4, always be sure to have your doctor try to break things down, in a language that you can understand so that you know exactly what's being said. Number 4, there's a lot of people that are, Black people that just are afraid of the doctor, right? Like, and, I don't necessarily enjoy going to the doctor. I mean, I'm not really afraid of any of my doctors, with the exception of the dentist. The dentist is, whatever. It terrifies me. I don't even like looking at the instruments. I don't like things sort of clanking around in my mouth. I don't like that smell. You can sort of smell the drills and things like that, but whatever. But I feel like a lot of people have what white coat syndrome, where they're just afraid. And when people are afraid of the doctor, even if they go, sometimes people will just avoid going altogether, right? And this is the case, especially with many men, and when I've worked on men, I stay on them about this, like, go to the doctor, check on your physical health. There's men that will run around with stuff, and will not go to the doctor, right? Because they're just like, no, I can treat it myself, or no, I don't want to go, like, because they're so terrified. They're not going to tell you that they're terrified sometimes because of that machismo or that ego or whatever, but really it's what it is. It's just being afraid of being poked and prodded and of being told that something is wrong. And so they don't like to do that. And so they kind of, if they go in, and then they rush out, and then they just kind of like, I don't want to even think about that ever again. So it's almost like they dissociate or they disconnect from that experience. Even if it wasn't necessarily a bad one, it's just because they're so anxious and so terrified of it that they don't want to reflect back on that. And so that they sort of carry that over to their children, where they're not speaking about their doctors. They're not talking about their blood tests. They're kind of like really disconnected from it, and they're like, I don't want to think about it. And this happens a lot in the cases where, people have sexually transmitted illnesses and things like that. And moving on to the next point, people can have illnesses, including sexually transmitted illnesses, which they pass on to their children. So there can be a lot of guilt and shame around that, right? It's like, and a lot of times, unfortunately, in Black families, when people have guilt and shame around things that they passed on, they go back to whatever my first or second point was, which is where I said that they attribute it to some other weird phenomenon, or they just dismiss it altogether, right? Where it's like, I know that, I've seen that before, but instead of me sort of owning up to it because it makes me feel inferior, it makes me feel guilty, it makes me feel like I have done my child wrong somehow as a parent by passing on things like that. So there's that portion of it. The next point, some people just like to keep secrets. I hate to say it, but people lie to their children all the time. And not only do they lie to their children, but they view their children as someone who should be seen and not heard, and don't deserve the respect or courtesy of a conversation or information. And it's like, I don't feel the need to report to my child. And so it's like, I don't feel the need to be, I don't feel the need to lower myself to that standard to talk to my child and inform them, because, they'll figure it out, and so that's where that pathology can come out, where, a child is not seen worthy of knowing information, of being communicated to. Like, what do I look like communicating to a child? A child should fear me. A child should put me up on a pedestal, but never, ever, ever should I communicate to a child on that level. And so they keep secrets because they don't respect their children. But if they keep secrets with respect to medical or mental health care, guess what else they're keeping secrets about? Everything else. So if this has been helpful, like, follow, and share. Thank you so much.